Welcome back to the Sanctuary Sunday School. It is always a pleasure to present the lesson to you, especially the first lesson in 2020. As you can see, I'm presenting from my home office today, and you may see me do that a little bit more this year, but nevertheless, we're going to go right into our lesson. This week's subject is Solomon Summons the Ark. And if you're using the Power for Living series, the subject is A Place for the Ark. And what we see here is a fulfillment of God's promise to David. As we know, David wanted to build the temple, and God promised him that he would establish his house and his son would build the temple. So we see here that this is exactly what happened, that David's son Solomon built the temple. And when we look at this, it was such a huge undertaking, and we skipped a lot from last lesson to this lesson, but I'm going to post a link in the comments or in the description, because when we covered this lesson last year, we went into great detail about God's directions and the specifications of the temple. So I'm going to post that link, especially if you're a teacher. You may want to study that background and just really see, because it really shows you how significant it is to be at the point that we are, and what a huge day that this was for Solomon, and why Solomon was so happy about being able to finally have a home for the Lord to dwell in. So we seem sorry. I still have a slight sore throat, so I'm going to be sipping tea while I'm presenting. But nevertheless, it's the first lesson of the year, and I'm not going to miss it. So we see here that the temple is complete, and God had a place to worship. And if you remember, David was saying, I'm living in my palace of cedar, but the ark of the Lord is dwelling in tents. And he had this heart. And so through his son, God allowed Solomon, his son, to build this temple. So now the ark of the Lord would have a permanent home, a place that was dedicated and set aside specifically for the work of the Lord. And that is so important, even for us today, to have a place and a time that is set aside specifically for the work of the Lord. And it says that he called for the elders and the heads of the children of Israel to move the ark out of the city of David, because again, David had built a tent for the ark of God, and that's where it was. And it says that it was in the 7th month, and that's critical, because when you look at your calendar, you will see a lot of different dates on the calendar celebrating Jewish feasts, and these feasts and these celebrations, they're in conjunction with these things that we see in the Bible. So there's the Passover, there's the time that they came out of Egypt, the time that they crossed over Jordan. There's this where the Ark of the Covenant. So there's all of these things. And that's one thing that I really admire about the Jewish community, the way that they've kept these records and the way that they honor everything that God did for them. And that's a lesson for us. Sometimes we get caught up in the day-to-day and, the stresses of life, and we neglect to remember, and honor what God has done for us and what God has brought us through. And that's a really good lesson to start the year. A lot of people are saying that it was a bad year, and this year I hope it's better. 2020 be good to me. But you shouldn't think that way, because no matter what you went through in 2019, the key word is through. You made it through. You've crossed over. You're still here. You have another day, new grace, new mercies. And this is what Solomon was so grateful for. He was here, they went through all of this. They went through 400 years in captivity, and they went through 40 years in the wilderness, and there was no temple. And Solomon, think about this as David's son, and I think about this as, the son of someone, the daughter of someone who was a pastor, a founder, to be able to complete the work that your father started, that's ordained by God. How powerful is that? And that's where Solomon is. And it says the priest took the ark, and this was important because the priests were the only ones who were qualified to carry the ark. And David had to tell them that, because there was somebody who tried to touch the ark and was not authorized, and he fell dead. And that's just another lesson that we kind of throw in there about how delicate the Spirit of God, the Word of God, the holiness of God is, you can't just grab it lightly. We really got to respect God. We got to respect the house of God. We got to respect the tools, the altar, even in our own churches. You don't play on the altar. Since one day somebody sat a baby bottle on the altar, you just sat prop stuff up there. We've got to reverence and respect the house of God. And this is what Solomon did. And then they came and they made a sacrifice. And the word says that the sacrifice was so great until they couldn't even number it. They couldn't even count it. The people came and they gave. And even when David started the process of giving for the temple, the people gave so much until David had to stop them because they were so excited. And wouldn't it be great to have that same attitude toward the house of God today? Sometimes it's so difficult. You have different fundraisers and building fund drives, and we're doing things, and sometimes we mumble and complain and we get tired. But these people they said couldn't even count. It was so big and it was so much. And then it speaks of the oracle of God, the most holy place. This was the place that the ark was set, and it talks about the cherubims. They were there and how the wings span over it. And I'm going to try to find a graphic to put up of what it looks like. And it was covered in gold, just beautiful, just splendor. And to see the care that both David and Solomon, but Solomon in building, the care that they put into this house of God and this place for the ark of God. And even, like I said, go back and look at that other lesson, because it talks about how God was so specific. And not only in the temple, even in the tabernacle. A tabernacle is a temporary dwelling place. It was a tent, but it wasn't like they just pitched any old tent anywhere for God. No, God had very specific instructions about how the tabernacles were even. That's just a tent. So imagine how much more important it was to follow God's specifications for his temple. And what that says to me, even for us that work in church, our churches should not be raggedy. They shouldn't be nasty. They shouldn't be dirty. We shouldn't be opening the doors late. We need to put some effort and some energy and have some pride in what we do and what we present to God, especially if we have a house of God that we expect him to come to and not only visit but dwell there. We need to have a place that is fitting, that is worthy of God. Just like David, we can't have fine houses and automobiles and do all this stuff and then have a raggedy house of God. And so this is what Solomon's heart was, to build this temple. And when they placed the ark in there, and this is where we see that God was pleased with it, because the glory of God filled the temple. The glory cloud fell, and it was so strong and it was so powerful until it says that the priests, they couldn't even do what they were going to do. Have you ever been in service and you had your program set, what you're going to say, what you're going to do, what songs, and the glory of God just comes in and destroys your whole program? This is what happened. And it says they couldn't even minister because God came. And when you think about it, the entire point of ministry is to invoke the presence of God, is to get deliverance for the people. So if God is pleased and he comes in and he delivers, ain't nothing for you to do but just raise your hand and say, Lord, I thank you, because the work is already done. And he came and he met them there. And how beautiful is that, to present something to the Lord, to honor the Lord in a way, to offer a sacrifice to him, to work for him in a way that he acknowledges, and his glory comes and it rests with your people. And then, Solomon began to speak to the people, and he said that the Lord would dwell in the thick darkness, that the thick smoke, the glory of the Lord. And then he said, I have built this house. And that, and that is, it's a thing where I've done it. It's accomplished. It's something that God, that's not a boastful thing, but it's a relief where God has given me this mission accomplished, and God is going to come here and he's going to dwell here and he's going to abide here forever. And this is literal and figurative, because as we do know, Solomon's temple did ultimately get destroyed. But when we talk about how God's promise to David was that he would establish his house, the house of David forever. And Solomon, at this point, he realized that he had completed his leg in the journey. See, God is everlasting. He's eternal. So What I do is my role, and somebody behind me is going to come do something else. So we want to make sure that we focus and we complete the mission that God has given to us. We want to be able to have a love for God and a love for the house of God, just like David and just like Solomon did. They made sure that there was a place for God. And I have a question for you. Is there a place for God in your life today? And I want to back up a little bit and talk about the contents of the ark, because the text here says that there was nothing there but the tables that God gave to Abraham. I'm sorry, the table that God gave to Moses, that's what was left in there. Originally, the Ark of the Covenant contained three things. It contained the tables, which God had given to Moses in the wilderness. It contained a jar of manna that they brought out of the wilderness. And it also contained Aaron's rod, which had budded, which was significant because typically when you cut off a branch, it's not going to bud because it's not connected to anything to grow. It's typically dead. But Aaron's rod actually budded. Those were the three things that were originally there. In this text, it says the only thing left there was the commandments, the stone tables that God had given to Moses. And, historians say they could have gotten lost when the Philistines had the ark or just down through the years. But look, the word of God is still what was there. It stood the test of time, and it was there, and they were able to recover that and to preserve that. And that just spoke a word to me. As long as the word of God is in my heart, do I have place in my heart for the word? Do I have room in my life for Lord? For the Lord? Am I too busy? Do I have too much on my plate? And I'm not doing what God has told me to do. And this is a really good lesson for the beginning of the year as we're planning, not only the beginning of the year, the beginning of the decade, where we're planning. I'm doing a thing called Design Your Decade, where I'm planning the best 10 years of my life. And you can join me with that as well. And God is at the center of that. And even, with me not doing the lesson last week, and I started to reflect and I started to shift some things. This ministry is growing and I'm getting amazing feedback. And God told me, look, you need to move everything out the way and do what I told you to do and make this a priority. And make sure there's room. Everybody, your challenge to me, from me to you, or even from God to you for 2020, make sure that there is room for what God has told you to do in your life. Put God first. Don't give him excuses, because you want the glory of the Lord to be on your life. When you walk in, you want people to see the glory of God in you. So again, happy 2020. And again, make sure that there is a place for the Lord in your life for the rest of your life.